Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to fundamentally shift how we look at human psychology and emotional pain. We're diving into the MBET Framework. That stands for Mindfulness-Based Experiential Therapy. Developed by Hari Murde over 25 years of clinical practice, this framework gives us a totally grounded, fresh way to look at the really heavy things that almost all of us carry. It's literally going to challenge everything we think we know about recovery, so let's just jump right in.
Why do some wounds never heal? It's kind of the elephant in the room, isn't it? It's the question we always seem to avoid. Most people who've been in therapy, read up on psychology, or honestly just lived long enough carry this quiet suspicion that some things just don't go away. Maybe it's a childhood loss that just surfaces completely out of nowhere. Or maybe it's a relationship rupture that still dictates exactly how intimacy feels to you today. Or a humiliation that somehow stayed lodged right in your chest despite years of you actively trying to work on it. Well, this explainer is here to validate that exact lived experience. That stubborn persistence you're feeling, it turns out it is absolutely not a sign that you're broken.
So here's the big paradigm shift. The mainstream therapeutic narrative almost always treats the persistence of a wound as a problem, right? It tells us, hey, if it still hurts, your healing has stalled. You've still got unfinished work. But the MBT framework offers a completely different and honestly a much more liberating read on this. Persistence is actually a structural bodily reality. It is not a failure. We really need to drop this expectation of erasure. This whole idea that a wound just has to vanish into thin air for you to be truly healed.
Now, before we go any deeper, I want to clarify something super important. MBET is not adversarial to traditional talk therapy at all. They are completely collaborative. MBET simply steps in to address the stuff that words alone just cannot reach. Think about a deep, heavy feeling of unsafety that you've maybe carried since you were a toddler, way before you even knew the word for fear. We simply can't talk our way out of a pain that was never encoded in language in the first place. So this framework gives us a practical way to actually approach those silent foundational injuries.
And that brings us perfectly to our first foundational concept, somatic genesis. MBET is grounded in this clinical reality that early relational wounds, we're talking about disruptions in connection, experiences of abandonment, getting totally overwhelmed, or just the slow buildup of unmet needs, these things register directly in the physical body. They have a body-level origin happening way before our minds have the vocabulary to even name what's going on. Because a wound with a somatic genesis was never wrapped up in words to begin with. Expecting verbal processing to just magically dissolve it, it completely misunderstands its very nature.
So, if a wound starts in the body is obviously going to react, and this creates what MBET calls body armor. We're talking about the bracing, the holding, those habitual physical contractions that just naturally develop around our early injuries. Now, from the outside, this might look like dysfunction or an unhealed wound, but surprisingly, it's the exact opposite. It's a highly intelligent, adaptive response. It's actually wild how stubbornly our bodies try to protect us, literally locking down our muscles to keep us safe from ghosts of the past. The architectural metaphor here is absolutely crucial. This armor is structural. If you were to just dismantle it completely and prematurely, it could seriously destabilize you. It's not brokenness, folks. It's an incredibly smart defense mechanism. Over time, these physical patterns of protection solidify into what's called your unconscious operating system, or UOS. Think of it as the background bodily logic that essentially runs the show as you navigate your entire lived experience. And the really vital thing you need to grasp here is that your UOS does not forget. It actively organizes your life around what happened to you. Again, this is pure survival intelligence. It's just intelligence that has outlived its original context. So the therapeutic work in MBET isn't about fighting or trying to delete your UOS. It's about bringing it into conscious awareness so you can finally relate to it in an entirely different way.
Workability, not resolution, is the clinical horizon. Let that sink in for a second. MBET draws really heavily on a huge Eastern contemplative inheritance, and this specific thread of wisdom shifts the whole clinical goal away from just making it stop. You see, resolution implies that the problem is completely gone forever. Workability, on the other hand, implies that you can function, you can thrive, and you can live a full life right alongside it. It fundamentally changes the entire goal of what we are actually aiming for when we say we want to heal.
For the longest time, Western clinical models have totally marginalized this perspective, right? They focus so heavily on eradicating the problem, just eliminating the pain entirely. But the Eastern contemplative roots of MBT offer us a totally different way of looking at suffering. The core question isn't, how do I make this stop? Actually, scratch that. It's more like, how do I meet this differently? In this context, impermanence doesn't mean the pain just dissolves and goes away forever. It just means the pain isn't fixed. It's not a solid, immovable object. It's not the final word. The wound might stay, sure, but we want it to breathe differently so it no longer commands every single room it enters.
Okay, so to really picture how this plays out, MBET uses something called the timeline of affect. Let's walk through it. In those super early years, from 0 to 5, wounds register somatically, right in the body, because language doesn't even exist yet. Then, as we move into our formative years, our teens and 20s, that emotion kind of pools and settles. It builds up that protective body armor we were just talking about. Finally, as we hit adulthood, our 30s and beyond, those affective residues don't just sit there passively. They actually become structural. They become an integrated, deeply embedded part of our internal architecture.
And this brings us to what is honestly the most fascinating revelation in the entire framework, the incredibly counterintuitive clinical reality that some of those deep, affective residues are actually load-bearing. Think of it exactly like a load-bearing wall in a house. It might be right in the middle of your living room, totally inconvenient, and you might really want to tear it down to open up the space. But if you excise it completely, the roof caves in. Ripping out these deep historical pains completely could actually destabilize your entire internal architecture.
So why on earth are they load-bearing? Well, because these residues actively connect a person to their history. They safely connect us to a grief that, frankly, simply deserves to remain. They hold on to love that has literally nowhere else to live after a profound loss. They form a vital, foundational thread of our identity that would just completely unravel if the wound were simply surgically removed. Now look, the longing to be free of pain, that is completely legitimate and deeply human. But the assumption that true freedom requires the absolute absence of pain, that is not always clinically or even humanly sound.
So the big question is, how do we actually live with this day to day? Well, MBET offers a really practical path forward, and it's called the somatic compass. This is a method of navigating your life by listening to your body's signals, rather than relying solely on the constant, exhausting commentary of your mind. And this is a real game changer, because it proves that the very same body carrying the wound, the body holding all that heavy structural armor, can actually be the exact instrument that guides you toward ease. You literally learn to listen to your body's physical cues to find safety and regulation in the present moment, all while fully acknowledging the past.
The wound may remain, but your relationship to it totally transforms. This right here is the central mantra of MBET. And please hear me out. This is not therapeutic fatalism or just resigning yourself to misery. It definitely doesn't mean you shouldn't bother trying to feel better. It is just a precise, life-altering distinction. We aren't promising a cure in the traditional magic wand sense, but rather a direction of travel. A massive shift in the quality of your lived experience, even right in the direct presence of what remains.
Because ultimately inhabiting your history differently, that is the healing. The goal shifts from this impossible perfectionist standard of being cured to something infinitely richer and, let's be honest, much more honest, a different quality of living your own life, wounds and all. Releasing that exhausting demand for complete erasure and instead just moving from dis-ease to greater ease, that is a worthy, dignified clinical aim. So I'm going to leave you with this one final thought to ponder today. If you finally stop trying to completely erase the heaviest parts of your history, how much energy might you finally have to simply live alongside them?